Hi everybody, welcome to the WAPOR first seminar of 2021. Wait a minute, I'm going to, so the theme of this seminar is electoral polls in difficult times. As you will see, and as you know, we have people from all over the world. Nnanwobu from Africa, and Alejandro Moreno, Mexico, Jill Darling, US, and Robert Chung from Hong Kong. And so our topics for discussion are how electoral polls are conducted and published in different parts of the world, what political, methodological, or pandemic-related difficulties pollsters face, and how they work to overcome them. So one important point here is that this is a part of a new series of WAPOR seminars. From now on, we will have three types of seminar. Thematic Seminar, this is the one that we have now on electoral polls in difficult times. Methods Training Seminar, and the next one will be on March 5 by Don Dillman on push-to-web surveys. And Regional Seminar, the next one in April, and the region has to be finalized. So now let's start with our thematic seminar. We start with Robert Chung. Robert is extremely well known. He's the president of the Hong Kong Public Opinion Research Institute, PORI, continuation of the public opinion program at University of Hong Kong that he founded in 1991. He is the current vice president-elect of WAPOR after serving as secretary-treasurer and chair of liaison. He also authored the 2012 edition of the Freedom to Publish Opinion Polls report. The title of his presentation is Polling in Hong Kong in Troubled Times. And if you listen to the media, you know that those are certainly troubled times. So, Robert, your turn.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everybody. I'm Robert, and I'm now sharing the screen of my presentation. So just 1 second. And I think here it goes. Right, so I think everybody could see the PowerPoint now. Am I right?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm very glad to be able to share with you on what is happening in Hong Kong. And the way I see what is happening in Hong Kong, and I always say that Hong Kong, although it's a small city, but it used to be a very international city. So culturally, it's really the East meeting the West, or the developed meeting the developing. So in a way, whatever is learned in Hong Kong in the past, and of course at the current moment, I think it would be of relevance to a lot of places in the world, if not the world as a whole. So tonight in my short presentation, we all know we are talking about troubles, problems. So basically, I'm asking these questions. How bad are we in Hong Kong? And of course, how bad are we in the world? And then what could we share with each other? What have we learned in Hong Kong and how to move forward? So with that, let me just very quickly show you what is the trouble in Hong Kong. So you know there is this social movement, and Times made the cover story of the umbrella movement that was in 2014. So actually, it's 6 to 7 years ago. But then when these social movements started, they actually stop for a while, and then it re-emerges again. And then you see all these pictures. And obviously, the latest so-called social movement pictures you see is that people are wearing masks. Now, when they first wear these masks, it's not for COVID, because COVID has not come yet. They're actually wearing masks to fight against a tear gas. So these are the pictorial stories of Hong Kong in the past few years. And of course, what you're seeing now, again, you're seeing people wearing masks, starting to wear masks. And now almost everybody has to wear masks, even when they move around, protest. But of course, we are not seeing protests anymore in the past many months because we are now seeing these pictures. COVID has taken over the agenda of the Hong Kong society and practically the global community as well. And this is a very recent picture that there is this sealing off of some districts, and then all these sanitary workers are moving in. So that is the picture of Hong Kong. So we're in a trouble. So with that, looking further, we all know we have a COVID issue around the world, and we are seeing lockdowns here and there. And then all these talks about the vaccines, and obviously we are having webinar now because it's difficult for us to travel and meet each other. So we are seeing a new normal in a way, and maybe you could call it new abnormal, but we do not know when would we go back to the previous normal. But don't think that outside Hong Kong, we are just seeing these health issues. You know very well that even under COVID, we are seeing social movement as well. And I know quite sure that everybody knows what this picture is about, because the presidential election in the States has actually somehow associated with some very unprecedented social movement. So I think all these group together to mean that, yes, all of us are in trouble. And in Hong Kong, actually it's trouble after trouble. The first trouble, of course, is social movement. And then before it was subsided, then we have this a pandemic issue as well. So we are having two troubles together. So how bad are we in Hong Kong? Let's look at Hong Kong. I know we are all interested in polling, so that is a sort of subjective feeling of the people. But let me start with the very so-called objective figures. This is a capture picture showing the economy of Hong Kong. So I, of course, won't go into it too deeply, but one moment. You can see that the big drop in the consolidated account of the government. And this you could see that is a very long period from 1997 up to this moment. And you see, and I highlighted the orange yellow, that economically speaking, it has been in the drop, and now we're seeing a very bad situation. Now, one moment, please, because, okay. Now, this is another picture, the Fiscal Reserve. So this basically shows that we are seeing a huge deficit last year. And for this big drop, that is sort of the orange drop, which sort of took place in over the 20 years or so. But now over the past year or two, we are seeing a big plunge. So this figure actually is the economic picture. And I like to bring to another kind of rating or ranking. It's really the freedom of the economy. And Hong Kong has been ranked as the freest economy in Hong Kong for a long, long time, since 1995 when this rating was first started. So Hong Kong had been the freest society, at least economically, but associated with that is also culturally, politically, a very free society. But somehow now we see a drop. And of course, Singaporeans will be very happy because they are now the first. But it's only because the rating of Hong Kong has dropped. So relatively speaking, well, Singapore is doing nicely, but Hong Kong has lost its freest economy position to become the second. And it is very likely that it will go on dropping. So that is the freedom thing. Now, turning to the opinion data that I've been working on for such a long time. I'm now showing you, I could show you lots and lots, hundreds of charts, but I've just picked a few. This would be the so-called core subjective indicators. That means how Hong Kong people feel about the degree of freedom, prosperity, stability, rule of law, democracy. Now, I've shown all these as 5 core indicators because these are the so-called values that have been stressed very much before the handover and then after the handover. But if you look at the various line charts, I like to highlight with the freedom yellow line because I think I have done a lot of studies analysis, and it shows that amongst all the core values, it could be 10 to 20, but of the core values, actually freedom is the core of the core values that people of Hong Kong treasure most. And in a way, we are being seen as the freest society, and people actually feel that Hong Kong had been the freest place. So they're very happy about that. Of course, we have the rule of law and democracy, but it's well-known fact and evidence is all around that Hong Kong had never been a very democratic society, but Hong Kong has been the freest society. But Hong Kong people are asking in the past decade or 2 decades for more democracy. So what does that mean? I think to most Hong Kong people, freedom has been their way of life and they want to protect it. The way to protect it is to have a very strong rule of law, and then the rule of law itself could best or should best be protected by a system of democratic institutes. So these are the 3 core values, but if you look at it, then you could see that over the past 2 or 3 years, has actually plunged. And we are talking about 20 odd years of mapping, and there's a big plunge. And so in an absolute and relative sense, Hong Kong is very, very bad, in very bad shape. I like to take you to a few subjective ratings of Hong Kong people. How do they feel about governments or the chief executives? And across the years, and I started with 1992 because we started opinion surveys almost 30 years ago, and you see a general downturn trend. But if you look at the really the last few years, the last session of the chief executive, then you see again, it's a big plunge. So that again concur with what I have been seeing. We have also compiled the so-called public sentiment index, and we have the political index, the general social index, and then the overall aggregated sentiment index. 3 indexes together shows the same picture, right? It's a big plunge over the past couple of years. So with that, I think the conclusion is very simple. Whether you look at the economic figures, objective indicators, or all these subjective feelings of the people, of course, made objective by science, of course, then you see the same picture. Hong Kong is in very bad shape. But the main theme or the umbrella of today's seminar or webinar is really electoral polls in difficult times. I have to say that, we don't have any trouble running electoral polls. We have all the troubles, but we don't have troubles with electoral polls. Why? Because the government has called it off. Last year is the election year, so we should have the legislature re-elected last year, but the government, for some reason, we could discuss that, has called it off. So we do not have any elections, so we don't have any trouble. That is one way to cure the trouble. You just ban everything from occurring, and then you don't have the trouble. But what I like to share is that had there been an election, what we used to do is that we run rolling polls like this one. For the past few sessions of Legislative Council, we run all these polls, rolling polls. We also run exit polls, and but actually we stopped our exit polls in 2012. That means 8 years ago we stopped it because there were these interferences. We did exit polls, but there were these interferences from the other political camps, and we think it is not the right time or the right place to run exit polls, so we stopped it. So that is one problem. And with the exit polls, we don't have elections. But in 2020, somehow we did run another kind of election poll, and that is the primary election. We call it a civil society primary election because it's nothing official. It's only a democratic camp who decided that they would like people to show their support of various candidates within the camp. So it's a primary, it's not an official primary. So we ran that poll, actually a civil reference type voting kind of primary, and that is the picture you've seen. And you could see that, well, I'm not in there because these are the organizers of the primaries, and they call it the Democrats 35 plus. That basically means that there are 70 seats in the Legislative Council. They want to gain 35, more than 35 as a majority. But that created a problem because we very soon see in the middle of last year, we have this national security law being implemented by Beijing, and of course the local government just endorse it. What does it mean when we have this national security law, where there's a long provision of it, but one of the articles says there couldn't be any subversive activities. And of course, you could take time to look at all these smaller provisions, but what is subversive activities? What is subversion? It's difficult to define, and the court has not yet made any ruling, but they have, at least the police, thought that the primary election was subversive. So they started to make arrests not too long ago, actually in January, a month ago, that they arrested those participants of the primary election. And this is where I work, the PORI. We actually run the surveys, we run the civil referendum, but the police came and searched our office. So that was what happened. Somehow, we are still fighting this litigation. We have applied to the court just last month that we are asking the police to return the seized material to us because they contain the respondent material, survey data. So in a way, we are in the danger of leaking some so-called private research data. So we think that has nothing to do with subversion. So we are now in this difficult position. We are fighting this little war or battle. So what is the Hong Kong lesson? I like to point to a report which I have written, of course, a team with another NGO, so-called the Public Sentiment Report last year, and I have these conclusions. What I concluded there was that don't just look at Hong Kong as having a social movement on a particular bill or whatever. I think in a very cultural sense, it is a fight between communism and capitalism on one hand, right? Communism, on the other hand, capitalism. And also on that divide, we are seeing paternalism and egalitarianism. We are seeing liberty, the concept of liberty versus responsibility, the concept of ultimate unity versus diversity, and of course, humanism versus patriotism. So I've concluded that when the pandemic subsides, we'll have to look back on all these so-called deep-rooted problems and see what is the Hong Kong lesson. So this is almost the end of my presentation. I started to ask questions, and now I pose all these questions. What are the HK values, Hong Kong values? I said, I repeat, freedom is of ultimate importance, freedom and liberty. But we also need the rule of law, also need the spirit of democracy in order to protect freedom. So that is the way Hong Kong people feel and think about it. I look back at what we are doing at WAPOR, and of course, I become an officer of WAPOR now. I think you study a constitution of WAPOR. WAPOR is there to promote liberty and equality of research in the spirit of science. So why protect science? Why we need all these core values? I would think, at least philosophically, that science is there to quest for the truth. So with the truth, we could beat everything. We could overcome all the difficulties. And professionalism and quality is there, especially for WAPOR, to set the standards for us to pursue the truth. So science and democracy actually work together to help humanity so that we could evolve peacefully and effectively. Of course, this is the question. Now we come to, in Hong Kong, it comes to this issue, that when we are no longer able to quest for the truth or speak the truth or publish the truth, what can we do? I conclude with this slide. I quote what Mahatma Gandhi actually said, and I actually mean it because this quote gives me strength. Gandhi was saying that when I despair, remember that all through history, there have been ways that truth has been suppressed, but at the end, even then, when there are difficult times, when there are tyrants and murderers, at the time they think they're invisible, but they always fall, and they always fall at the end. So with that, I think we should have faith in humankind. I didn't use mankind in order to be gender neutral, okay? We have to believe in humankind. We should live as one humankind. And I think this is the HK value. And this is my sort of advice and my commitment to what we could do to overcome the problems we are facing. So thank you very much. I think I should stop sharing and then I give the panel back to Claire.
Thanks a lot, Robert. There are a few things I wanted to say before we go on. We're gonna have our 4 presenters, and questions and answers, comments, and all that will be kept for the end. However, if you don't want to forget about things, you may put things in the chat or in the question and answer. If it is possible to answer it quickly, presenters will do it. If not, it will all come back at the end. Our next presenter is, wait a minute, Jill Darling. She surveyed, she comes from the United States. This is not a place we're used to speak of as a troubled place, but not anymore. But it is a troubled place in terms of surveys, in terms of surveys for presidential election, the last 2 presidential elections. So there are people working on that to have better estimate of presidential election. So Jill Darling is Survey Director of the Center for Economic and Social Research, Director of USC Dawn-Saif Daybreak Election Poll at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Her current focus is on a broad range of research using the Understanding America study, a probability-based internet panel, and she spent the last 2 decades of her career as a newspaper pollster for the Los Angeles Times poll, conducting national, state, and local telephone surveys and state and national exit polls. So the title of her presentation is Experiences with U.S. National Election Polling in 2016 and 2020 using a probability-based internet panel and experimental outcomes model. So Jill, you can share now, and I will stop sharing, and you go.
How do I get this to be full screen? I can't see it. Thank you, Claire. As Claire said, Jill Darling, Survey Director for the Understanding America study at the Center for Economic and Social Research. And I really, I sort of have a new perspective on this whole thing after Robert's presentation. The difficulties in the U.S., of course, are new to us and are considerably concerning in 2020 in particular, with all of the things going on. My presentation is going to have a little closer focus on our experiences of polling, since we still do have an election to be polling, and in the context of 2 very different election years. So I just want to talk a little bit about our team. We conducted our polling in partnership with and funded by the Center for the Political Future at USC, working with 2 campaign veterans from the left and right of the political spectrum. That's Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy there on the left. And also part of our team were 4 people who got NSF funding to do to test some promising models they've used to predict outcomes in previous elections. That's Wendy Brune de Brune from the Saul Price Public School of Public Policy, Saul Price School of Public Policy, and also the Schaefer Center at USC, and also the Center for Economic and Social Research, and Merida Galatuk and Henry Olson from the Santa Fe Institute, and Drazen Prelek from MIT. As I mentioned, they have an NSF grant to study some measures that I'm going to be talking about that are very promising and have worked well in previous elections here in the United States and also in other countries. And so while I'm here in some way representing the US in polling, which was an awkward kind of a thing to be thinking about, in many ways, because in many ways, we're really not a typical US set of pollsters, but, and our methods are non-traditional. We're using probability methods rather than the traditional sort of categorical questions that are used in polling generally. our focus is on finding ways to improve election outcome modeling. However, of course, the work that we did is polling in the context of a very eventful election year this year. And it's the same as all the other pollsters who are out there working. We're trying to accurately predict the outcomes of elections and track the electorate and find out what's going on with people. So, what happened here? Sorry. Let me just very quickly talk about our methodology. I don't know why this keeps moving without me touching it. All right. I'm going to go pretty fast through this because we have the ability to have the Q&A later if you have questions about our methodology. We did our polling in 2016 and 2020 using the Understanding America study. It's a probability-based internet panel of more than 9,000 people right now. We're building it to be about 15,000. It was developed by Ari Kaptein, whose picture I have here, many of you know. He developed this at USC in 2014. I joined in 2016. So we have built and maintained this probability-based panel with care, using best practices for recruitment and retention. The panel is mostly used for non-polling purposes, the main one being an aging study funded by NIA. And so, but it actually is also a terrific place to be able to do polling because we know a lot about the participants. And so we're able to look at the outcomes and do a lot of study based on a lot of information that we know about everybody who has been, who's in our panel. The measures that we used are a suite of probability measures at levels ranging from predictions of one's own vote to predictions of how one's social circle will vote and how your state and the country will vote. So briefly, our own vote probability question is, we ask them their probability of voting in the election, and then if they do vote in the election, what the % chance is that they will vote for the candidates, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, someone else. This adds up to 100%. They give us percentages. Then the same thing for the social circle. What percentage of your social contacts that live in your state are likely to vote in the 2020 presidential election? And then out of all of those social contacts, what percentage will vote for Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and someone else? And then the probability of the vote at the state and national level. So these are the questions that our NSF team got funding to look at again, the social circle vote. And it gives us a bunch of different levels to be able to look at this and to be able to see how the modeling works in each case. All right, so we did tracking polls, as I mentioned, in 2016 and 2020. We do national polling, estimating the national popular vote for president. So we, like all national pollsters in the US, or most anyway, are in the position of polling an election outcome, which is going to ultimately be determined a different way. There's only really been 4 times in history when the winner of the popular vote that we're tracking and the Electoral College, where the president is actually elected in the United States, were different. One of those times was 2016. The previous time was in 2020. So I'll now very quickly just give you an overview of the methodology that we use in these tracking polls, and then be able to get on and talk about some experiences. All right, so we, in 2016, which is the first time we did this in our poll in our panel at USC, we had about 4,000, a little bit more than that, participants assigned to a particular day of the week. They participated once every week. We did 18 waves starting in July. We had graphs online that we updated daily with rolling 7-day averages. And we made our microdata available in real time so that people could follow along and reweight our data and look at our methodology and give us feedback on it in real time. And we did get a lot of feedback on it. So that was an interesting process. 3 measures we used in this one for the tracking poll that they did every week, plus the social circle questions were asked in some extra polling that we did. And that was the own probability of the voting and the % chance that each candidate would win in the country. Then in 2020, we changed this to 14-day waves. People, it was about 5,500 or more people who participated each week. They were again assigned a day of the week, but they did it every other week. We did 6 waves starting in August. We again updated our graphs first with rolling 7-day averages, and then we switched to 14-day averages when we realized that the half sample was causing a bit of periodicity in our graph. We used 6 measures in this tracking poll. So every other week, people would answer their own probability of voting. They predict the national vote, they predict the state vote, the social circle vote. And then also we asked the categorical, if the election were held today, would you vote for Biden, Trump, and then the other candidates? So we also had a measure that allowed us to look at third-party candidates in case there was any change there, rather than having them be lumped together into someone else. All right, so you may have noticed that these 2 tracking graphs are very different in how they look. And we post these graphs of our tracking polls online, partly because it's really very interesting to be able to see any changes that occur over time. Our probability methods are particularly suited, I think, to measuring how voter support for candidates can respond to various election events. You can see in the 2016 graph here on the left that voter responses created a sort of heat map as their probability of voting for the candidates changed in response to the events that occurred during that time. We had, a variety of events that seemed, in a sort of normal election year to be, some of them could have been election changing events. We had the first female nominee for president by the Democrats. That Hillary Clinton then made a couple of stumbles that, wouldn't necessarily derail a candidacy, but we did see changes in the graphs and based on them. There was in any other year, Donald Trump's Access Hollywood video where he made lewd comments would have ended someone's candidacy, but of course, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And then in an extremely unprecedented event, the head of the FBI revealed they were investigating Clinton's use of a personal email server. And you can see there at the end that was a big change that ended up taking the difference between the candidates out of the margin of sampling error. So I'll talk more about the outcome of this later on. But the background for this was really that Donald Trump was new. He was very much a surprise candidate who the media and also the public were not quite sure how to react to. Of course, in 2020, we had more time to get used to him. And so the media and the public really kind of had settled into factions that were quite polarized in a way that we really have never seen before. It was really unprecedented. So the background for 2020 has not only this unprecedented polarization, but of course the global COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdowns that we had in reaction to those that were different across the country depending on state, but nonetheless they made a huge impact. We had a recession, the global recession. And our stock market crashed. Millions of people were out of work. People were trying to work from home. So the context was very, very different. So also before we started polling in August, which is what we have here, Donald Trump had become the 3rd sitting president in US history to be impeached by the US House of Representatives. He was then acquitted by the Republican majority Senate, but all of that was occurring in 2020. So we started polling in the summer, and one would think any of these events that I have listed on the screen that happened between summer and fall could have impacted voter support for the candidates. But if you look at that graph, nothing was happening. We don't have these very satisfying changes in sort of heat map about the way people are feeling about the candidates, depending on what was going on. We had, months of angry protests. We had the first African-American Asian female vice president in history who was nominated. We had changes to the US Postal Service that created slowdowns in service at the same time when voting by mail spiked because people were at home. We had an intense politicization, which is a word I have a hard time saying, of both the pandemic and the reliability of voting by mail and voting during the pandemic. And we had the death of liberal US Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died just before the election, and the Republican Senate confirmed her conservative replacement days before it happened, which was another event quite unprecedented. As you can see here, there's a point or two change, but really not very much. And so that was very different than what we saw in 2016. And I think that there are some clues here about what may be missing and why we didn't quite nail the outcome the way that we would have liked to. And I think that that has to do with sort of the middle ground voters in our poll, the ones who are possibly going to vote for one candidate or another and who are still making up their minds. We had very few undecided. It was a very small undecided group. But it may be that there was a sort of a broader group of people who were middle range voters who just didn't want to answer questions in our tracking poll. And, you know, we have looked at who those people might be, and there isn't any obvious answer to that right away. We're still continuing to do analysis, but there's some other clues that I'll talk about. So polling during those challenges, you know, I mean, in some sense, we're insulated from that. We have a panel that we use, but these folks are, of course, also in the middle of, you know, this very polarized electorate. Our panel is also very polarized. And, you know, what we're able to do, though, because of election polling actually having an outcome, is that we can look at the outcome compared to what we did and then do all of our analysis. Our goal here, of course, is, you know, finding a way of doing political polling that is going to be more accurate and actually add something to the dialogue around, you know, what's going on during the election. And not using these non-standard probability methods. So we do a post-election poll immediately after the election. We compare our outcomes to the actual vote, and then we're able to do pre and post, you know, analysis and get an idea about what happened. This year, of course, we had a huge, a massive turnout, and also unprecedented levels of mail voting. All of that slowed the vote count. We also had challenges by the Trump administration to try and overturn the vote counts in several states, which also contributed to getting delayed results. And in the, so what this looked like in terms of the, how our outcomes actually looked in comparison to what happened. The top line there is 538.com's average of polls, national polls across the country, and ours is at the bottom. We ended up with about an 11-point Biden lead. The average was an 8-point in the 538.com averages. We're missing some people in this graph. It's unfortunate the way that the graph is set up compared to the way we actually collect the data, that we don't have a small group of final voters who are in that data point. And if you actually add those in, we're at 9 points, but the actual margin was Biden by 4 points. So we overstated Biden in this case, and so did the rest of the national polls. So we're all in the process of looking to see what happened. We are in a great position of having a lot of information about our panelists. So we have already done a lot of study, and we are in the middle of doing a lot more, which we will publish as we go along. So in the analysis that we did so far, we see that our own probability questions actually did a great job of predicting the overall likelihood of voting. If people said that they were highly likely to vote, they did, and the actual vote for the candidates. This year in 2020, because of this polarization, we really saw these probability methods almost turn into a 2-point categorical, in the sense that they would just say, you know, almost everyone was piled up on 0 and 100% for Donald Trump and Joe Biden. In 2016, there was a group in the middle, you know, there was sort of a 50% hump and then a spread from 0 to 100. But this year, really, everyone was piled up on either end. So it's, again, that sort of middle ground, that sort of missing middle ground of voters. Who are they? We've looked and looked. There's some evidence that we have some differential attrition and some also differential decision-making about consenting to come into the survey. But those really aren't, if you account for that, it doesn't really give you what you need to be able to account for that. And it may be really that the missingness is spread across categories of people that we aren't able to pinpoint in that way yet. So we're going to keep looking. We also measured voter suppression, and we did find some evidence of it, not to a level where it could have played a significant role in the outcome and have accounted for this. So one of the things we wanted to be able to say was, well, if we just account for the voter suppression, then everything is fine. But that isn't. It does account for a small percentage. We also have the late deciders, of course, which all polls don't have, all pre-election polls don't have. And that would have brought Trump's percentage up in the own vote and Biden's down. Once again, not enough to get us the outcome. It would have gotten us a couple of points closer because we had about 10% of the electorate who said that they made up their minds on election day. And about 19% who said that they had made up their mind the week before. And also because of the way that the poll was constructed, we didn't have all of their votes in the poll. Once again, these are interesting pieces of the puzzle. And then for, the good thing is, though, is we had all of these different models. I'm not going to show you all of them because I just don't have time, but I will show you the comparison between, this is our own probability model that I've been talking about. The one that we had was our main graphic. We also were showing all of these other graphics, all of these other models as graphics on our website. And the one on the right is the social circle probability. And as you can see, it's very similar in the sense that it's not moving around very much, although it does have some more interesting sort of changes in it that I haven't had a chance to look at myself. I'm not sure if the team has, but at the end, they ended up with a 4-point Biden lead, which is spot on. So honestly, this did the best job of any of the measures that we had. The categorical, I think, was the farthest off. And our probability method, as I mentioned, is about 5 to 7 points off. So we are really interested in the social circle methods. We're excited by the work that this team has been doing. They're also thinking about how to do modeling using some of these questions. And so, one of the questions is, why would social circle methods work better? And why is this a very promising way to be thinking about doing polling? And there are a few reasons why this may be working better. And one of them is that it indirectly increases sample size of the poll. It may actually be helping us kind of get a view of these people who are either not participating in our survey or they're not in our panel, who are making up their minds. I mean, I think they must be in our panel, but they weren't participating in our tracking poll. And, so we're getting an idea about the opinions of those people based on the people who know them. And so this is related to, but different than, of course, the hidden voters idea, which is that the people in your sample, the people in your survey may just not be telling you about their very polarizing candidate. Our NSF team tested this using their social circle methods to ask what percentage that people thought of their social circle might be not telling the truth about their candidate support out of embarrassment, out of fear of harassment, or actually literally wanting to skew poll results, as we hear people claim that is happening. These were small incidents, about 1 out of 10 for embarrassment and fear of harassment, and about 5% for the wanting to skew poll results. And interestingly enough, there were higher predictions of each of these behaviors for people's social circle when they were a Trump voter. So those were significantly different for the Trump circles. So there's another perhaps piece of the puzzle. We may have a group of people who are just not telling us the truth, or they're calling themselves undecided when they really are decided. And the other is that this may help us include votes from people who decide who they're going to vote for on election day. We don't have that data because it's election day and we're not polling that day. But so far we actually start polling the post-election the following day. So far in our data, that looks like it was about 10% who said that they made up their mind. And it's really quite possible that many of these late deciding voters could be influenced by the decisions made by their friends and family. And so, when we know about the social circles, can be giving us some insight into those that group of voters as well. All right, I have some citations and links for some publications and blog posts and conversation pieces here. And I have my contact information here. Quite happy to talk to people about anything that I've talked about here and answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jill, for this very interesting presentation. For the next presenter, I will just look. When you see me appearing, it means that your time is a bit over. So now our next presenter here is Alejandro Moreno. So Robert Chung is our next president. Alejandro is our former president of WAPOR. He's professor of political science at ITAM in Mexico and director of public opinion polls at El Financiero, also in Mexico. He obtained his PhD from the University of Michigan. Alejandro Moreno has been president of WAPOR in 2013-2014. The title of his presentation, Challenges for Election Polls, Reflections for the Mexico 2021 Midterm Election that are going to be conducted soon. He's going to tell us about that. And before I give him before he starts, just tell everybody that all the slides and all the recordings are going to be available on the WAPOR website. Alejandro, your turn.
Thank you very much, Claire. I will share my screen. And of course, it's a pleasure to be in this WAPOR webinar. Thank you for inviting me and having the opportunity to talk with you and share this webinar with such distinguished pollsters from, like you said, Claire, all over the world. It's good to see you all. My presentation is a little bit speculative because it's looking ahead. It's looking at what kind of trouble we may have towards the coming election in Mexico, even though it is Mexico specific and my experience as a public pollster, well, it's over 20 years in Mexico in particular. I think that some of the ideas might have some application for different countries. I have tried to be exhaustive I asked myself because this morning Claire told us what the guiding ideas were about what troubled times mean, but I didn't get this information before, so I had to sort of speculate what does it mean to have difficult times for elections. So I will start my reflections with the question, what do we mean by difficult times? And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the pandemics. As we listen from Robert's presentation, it's not the only thing, I have other ones, but the pandemics bring a lot of issues. It raises lots of issues that have to do with the profession that we do and the results that we get. Of course, we're talking about city or country lockdowns that in the case of Mexico and perhaps many other Latin American contexts will basically close the possibility to conduct face-to-face polls, which in elections they are still the majority of polls, or they were still the majority of polls until, at least if I remember, until 2018 in our presidential elections. So this is a major situation. This is a major problem. It has to do with, of course, health-related issues, sanitary protocols, but also, and we have to think deeply about this, about how social trust or distrust is in this context. Do people feel like participating in a survey? Do people feel threatened when interviewers come from a survey organization to their homes? Or even better, and I say better because last year we noticed in Mexico that during the lockdown, people were actually happy to receive a call from a polling organization and spend a few minutes sharing their opinions with us. So that was actually unexpected, surprising, very pleasant, but certainly the pandemic brings a lot of issues to consider. But there are many other aspects to keep in mind by trying to respond what we mean by difficult times. There are lots of safety issues all over the world that include conflicts, having risky zones, of course, crime. In Mexico, we have zones in which polling can be very difficult because of crime. So this is part of the context. But let's not forget, and here Jill's presentation also is confirming of this. Of course, I didn't have in mind the issue that Robert raised, which is very important. Not having elections is a serious consideration. But assuming we do, and that the election is going to take place, there are also institutional and political contexts that we can take into consideration in these difficult times. For example, are there any restricting laws to the polling profession, to the polling activities, as we saw in the case of Hong Kong with political pressures? Does this affect the profession as a whole, or does it affect certain parts of it, like what kind of modes of interviewing we can do, what kind of dissemination we can practice, how much freedom do we have in our political context, our institutional context? And I think I will not delve into this because from Robert's presentation, I think it was very clear. I will delve into election-specific issues. For example, Mexico presents a lot of new challenges that polling organizations will have to deal with. For example, the fact that we have new and interesting coalitions. I will talk more about this briefly later, but estimating support for coalitions has not been an easy activity for Mexican pollsters. We have had major polling errors in recent elections due partly because voting behavior with coalitions has been quite difficult to capture. And now considering that these coalitions are actually partial alliances, not national alliances, but district-specific alliances, may add a little bit of trouble too. In Mexico 2021, we will have the largest election, not just in terms of how many potential voters. Of course, every new election is the largest election because we have more voters in the voter list, but because we have the highest number of races, both national for renewing Congress, but also because the election laws have been putting what used to be a disaggregated set of governors and local elections throughout different years. Now they are coinciding into a single date. So we have a larger number of races. And of course, these will probably need and surely will have a higher number of polls. I will show a graph in a few minutes that shows how the number of polls has been increasing importantly in Mexico. Something that Claire and I have been also having nice, cordial, but also controversial talks in the past is turnout and likely voter estimations. With the changes in the context, with the pandemics, with changes in methodologies, this of course becomes a major challenge. And let us not forget, Jill was referring to political polarization in the United States, and we have had evidence that there is an increasing political polarization in Mexico as well. One of the questions here is not just the political polarization in itself in the electoral arena, but how attitudes toward polls are being recorded. How do we see the polls from both sides of the political spectrum, or whatever the polarization is defined upon? How do people, readers, partisans, political groups are reacting to the polls that we are actually publishing? And of course, there are economic considerations. This is, as we saw from Robert's graphs, this is the case in many countries. Mexico is no exception. Economic crisis, unemployment, fewer budgets for different things. And of course, polls are part of that. We are coming to the largest election in our recent history, but also with budget constraints that clearly reflect the economic context. So this is something to consider. We will need more polls, but we have probably fewer resources. How can we ensure to have more information of high quality with fewer resources? I think it's not a minor thing. Of course, we all want some good level of accuracy, an acceptable level of accuracy. As I will show briefly, as I say, the new coalitions, the partial alliances, the high number of races are a major thing to consider, but also methodological adaptations, not only because of the pandemics, which of course is a major aspect to take into account, but also because by natural evolution of the polling profession, methods change. The budgetary constraints, the social changes, everything that influences the need for adapting to new methodologies. In some countries like the US or Britain, for example, telephone and online polls are very, very regular, very normal, but we are not in Mexico so used to them in election times. What about mixed methods? What about weighting? What about the use of the new census data that we just got from the census office in Mexico? How is this going to help us to adapt methodologically to this situation? I think that this brings us to another issue to take into account. I see, and this has a good and a bad side that I will quickly refer to, but there is a professional resistance to new adaptations. What I mean by a good side is that, of course, as a profession, we have to be watching, we have to be aware of what practices, good and bad ones, are developing, and what to accept as a good practice in the profession. But also there is a potentially negative side in the sense that because we as a profession are used, or at least some of segments of the profession are used to polls being conducted in certain ways only because in the last 3 or 4 decades we do them face to face and the circumstances have helped to that methodology. There is a resistance to other possible methodologies, and this may have a potential impact on the credibility because of the lack of consensus on what is accepted or not accepted in the polling profession during these election times. For example, the possibility of mixed methods, so partly face-to-face, partly telephone, partly online, which will take us to another series of technical considerations. And of course, the public dissemination of our data. I referred to political polarization before. I think social media are a good example. We published a poll on voting intentions yesterday, and it's incredibly interesting to see reactions to the poll on Twitter, for example. But many of them are, in fact, trying to disqualify polls in many ways. So this is going to be interesting to see how the public's attitude towards the polls are. Of course, discussion and evaluation in universities and academic centers will be important. In Mexico, we have had the fortune, and WAPOR has been a good companion in all this, that the National Elections Institute helps us, the pollster profession, to evaluate our work right after the election. And I think there is a good collection of documents and discussions and meetings that, thanks to the Elections Institute, we have had. One of the things that I've talked to Claire about before, and I was listening to her before the webinar began, is this question about turnout and whether estimating likely voters helps or doesn't help. Of course, it depends on how you do it. It may go the wrong way. It may be helpful. In my case and experience, it has helped over the past 20 years to get a little better results, a little more accurate results. And one of the reasons is because, as you can see, the levels of turnout in Mexican elections, in presidential elections, we have averaged about 60%, maybe a little more since 2000. That means 40% of the electorate stays home or doesn't go to the polls. And in midterm elections, which is what we have this year, less than half of the national electorate comes to vote. My sense and my expectation for 2021 is that because we have a larger number of governor races, almost half of all the states, the level of turnout may be going a little bit up to 50%, perhaps a little more, of course, considering and assuming that the pandemics will not be a major constraint in the next 5 months. But assuming that the election will be held more or less regularly, I would expect a little bit of jump in the turnout. That still means that half of the electorate will not turn out to vote. And with changes in methodologies, with new coalitions, with different aspects that I have mentioned, the estimations of likely voters may be actually some terra incognita, some territory in which we actually have not gotten into. So this is not a minor concern. Not all pollsters in Mexico use likely voters. Maybe this is not a general concern. It is for some of them, and I think that this is a major challenge for the coming election. Again, there is an assumption here that the half of the electorate that doesn't vote doesn't differ significantly in their political preferences. What we have seen in the past is that even if they differ slightly, it makes a difference for the polling accuracy. Speaking of accuracy, coming to the 2021 election, we have some good news and bad news from the accuracy record in Mexico. The good news for 2021 is that midterm elections have had a more partisan, I would say, very stable look. They don't jump up and down at least in the past. And polls have been more accurate in midterm elections than in both presidential or state governor races. So that's good news based on what has happened in the past. That doesn't guarantee that it will be the case in the next few months. But we do have a better record for midterm elections. The bad news is that besides the midterm elections, we have 15 state governor races in addition to many other local races, more than 2,000 races. And Mexican polling has had a difficult time estimating support for party coalitions, as I said. Good examples are 2010 and 2016. I will show you how the error in estimation has jumped significantly in those elections, only with a coalition that included the center-right PAN and the center-left PRD, a so-called unnatural coalition against the PRI. In 2021, interestingly, these former opponents are actually joining together in a partial coalition, PAN, PRI, and PRD, against the current governing party, Morena. So this is going to be a major challenge, because if we were not very successful in a coalition PAN-PRD, this actually brings major concerns about how this will happen. Very briefly, I will show you, this comes from a book that I published in 2018, graphically putting more or less sort of like the result of the election in presidential elections on one side and midterm elections, just to show the dispersion of the final polls to see how many of them fall within the margin of error, the theoretical margin of error, how many fall out of it. But of course, I am very graphical. This helps me to see patterns, and having the names for the polling organizations also help. But the summary is that, just to give some data to what I said, congressional elections have given us a historical, this should be average error, which is smaller to presidential elections and state governor elections, 2.6, using just the basic Mosteller 3 historically, not just the average for one election, but all elections from 1994 to 2015. I need to update this to 2018, of course, but this is what was published in my book that year, so I'm using the same reference. And of course, the error in advantage is also a little bit bigger in all cases, but smaller in congressional elections. And as you can see, the number of polls, the final polls, not the polls throughout the campaign, but only the final polls from different polling organizations, is this at the bottom of the table. Lots of them state governor elections, because we have simply had many, many state governors elections. We had 32 states, including Mexico City, and elections in each of them every 6 years, or shorter time now that they are being coincided with the federal elections. I see Claire there, so I'm assuming I have probably a minute, and I have one final chart to show, which is the number of election polls, final, not the total, which is obviously larger, but final election polls by organizations. As you can see, it has increased the number over the years. And if we put 2018 here, is simply well beyond these limits. We had more pollings, final polls than ever. And it is likely that 2021, assuming that, of course, budgetary constraint will not play a role here, but we may even have more final polls, because one, we have the federal elections and an unusually high number of governor races and many, many local races. So the accuracy for Mexico has been reflecting also these. And I will finish with this, Claire, just a basic Mosteller 3, the average error, and Mosteller 5, the average advantage error. And as you can see, just point out 2010 and 2016 in M3 error have been higher. And I think it is very well attributable to the fact that the coalitions were hard to measure. It also shows in Mosteller 5, even though in 2015 here also shows. But again, these are, I would say, not very acceptable levels. I hope that the Mexican profession, the Mexican polling industry improves. But again, one warning, I'm including everything that was published here from well-known and well-reputed polling organizations and not so well-reputed, or just one shot. I mean, those organizations that just appear in one election, everything is considered in these numbers. So I hope that these general reflections make sense, maybe for other contexts. I think that it will be very challenging, and I do hope that whatever those challenges are, the Mexican polling profession can do well in the next elections. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Alejandro. I'm glad you spoke a lot about turnout, because I was thinking about having a webinar on measuring turnout and its consequences. So I think it would get a lot of people around. Now we will go on with our last presenter. I'm gonna share screen here. Yes. Paul Nnanwobu is CEO at Random Dynamic Resources. He has over 25 years experience in market opinion and social research. He is the publisher of Research Intelligence magazine, currently Nigeria representative for WAPOR. as well as current Secretary General of Nigerian Market Research Association. He holds a postgraduate degree in journalism and an MBA in international business. I presented Paul as coming from Africa. Of course, Africa is not a country. He's from Nigeria. But I know that he's is conducting polls in more than, I don't know, I think it's 15 countries. He will tell you about it. He does not conduct surveys only in Nigeria. So the title of Paul's presentation, Electoral Polls in Sub-Saharan Africa, a Tall Order. And I'm really, really glad to have somebody from Nigeria and from Africa, because we do not hear much about what is happening there. So Paul, you can go.
Okay. Just a moment, share my screen. Okay. All right, so my name is Paul. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria, leading a team of researchers from Random Dynamic Resources. Actually, because of time, I'm going to quickly, but also to bring out the salient points that can help us understand what the electoral poll environment is in Sub-Saharan Africa. So in Africa, we base everything that we do through sense making in a concept known as Ubuntu. From what you see on the screen, it means I am because you are. And it's rooted in African concept of communalism. Everything that we do, we have to look at our brother, what they are doing. And then the good saying goes, wherever you are, light up the world, that you can make a difference. We cannot understand the African electoral system or polling without going back to the past, because Africa has got a checkered history in terms of political development. And that whatever it is, we are like work in progress. If you look at the left, by my left hand of the screen, you see some individuals there. There's predominantly the West African region. And you can see Azikiwe, who was the first president of Nigeria, Nkrumah for Ghana, Felix Houphouët-Boigny for Ivory Coast, or Cote d'Ivoire, and Olympio of Togo. In our political process and democratic development in most of the West African countries is checkered by what's called coup-prone countries. That is countries that they are instances of coups, those who want to legitimize their autocratic governance by all means. And in the 70s and up to well of 80s, you see the Central Africa, most of us know about Joseph Mobutu, who changed his name to Mobutu Sese Seko. He's a very flamboyant president of his time. And then Leo Mba of Gabon, and Francois of Chad, and Neto of Angola. What is common about these people there is because they are known to have stayed too long in the office. So long-term single-party states. And then down to the south here, you have Duncan, who was the first post-independent South Africa, and Sam Nujoma of Namibia, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, and Kama of Botswana. Again, what is common there is that we know about South African history, have been checked out by also appetite system. Sam Nujoma stayed too long after fighting for independence. Robert Mugabe just died a few years ago after spending so many years, one of the longest serving presidents we have in the continent. And of course, on the other side, which is the right-hand side, you have Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Kamus Banda of Malawi, Amagmiro of Burundi, Uganda, and Mutesa of Uganda. Again, these countries and their presidents are noted for having stayed too long one-party states. So you find out that you cannot understand today's of Africa, Africa today, and Africa tomorrow without first understanding where we're coming from. So incidentally, we are going to look at our electoral terrain in the 60s and 70s. From the 50s through the 70s, we also know that the colonization swept across Africa, especially the Sub-Saharan Africa. That's where so many African countries gain independence. And Africa is very unique because if you look at it from one perspective, we think that Africa is just one country, but you have close to 55 independent sovereign nations with close to about 2,000 indigenous languages and nationalities. So our diversity is a great strength for us if we harness it very well. The young seed of freedom enabled by the independence was short-lived. Why? Because of the instability, political instability that occasioned by the incidental military coups and one-party state. What it means that this also provided avenue for some of them to cause violence because they want to hold on to power. So we found that elections in post-colonial Africa, therefore, tilted towards something like a state-regulated non-competitive model. In countries like Togo or Benin Republic and Kenya, you have a situation whereby there is a measure one-party rule, where makeshift elections were organized to legitimize the political order. In places like Gabon, Mauritius, and Zimbabwe, although they have relatively something like a multi-party elections were held in de facto one-party states. So you found that these things have not really left most African countries, especially Sub-Saharan Africa. We are still battling to find our feet. But in the 90s, a lot of change began to happen. There were few or virtually no opinion polls during this period. Participatory democracy was just taking root. A lot of progress has been made, yet violence is still plagues many African nations. And one of the fundamental things is that the Western world also, the developed nations, interfere a lot in different ways in African electoral process. We also know about Kenya, 2007-2008 post-elected crisis. In Zimbabwe, 2000 and 2008, Cote d'Ivoire had their problem. In 2010 and 2011, we know about Gbagbo and how Ouattara came into power. There was also pocket of election crisis in Nigeria in 2011 and 2015. 2015 was a changing mood because, I mean, between 2011 and 2015, we had a lot of problems. The Boko Haram in the northeastern part of Nigeria was causing a lot of havoc. In fact, presidential election was to put forward for some months. And then, of course, we know what we are now hearing after that about the Cambridge Analytica hacking of one of the presidential candidates' email. So far, to date, we have close to about 5,000 deaths resulting from violence, electoral violence in Nigeria. And what this has done is that many people have developed what's called a voter apathy. They are not interested, because they don't believe that their vote will count. So you can see that the legacy of colonial dominance, directly or indirectly, still pervades Africa's electoral system up to today. Electoral polling is a new development. And Africa, as we know, produces less than 3% of global research output. So you will see that the pre-colonial political system in Africa has some shade of democratic principle. But you see, the concept of voting majority, political majority, and minority, we are not part of original African political tradition. All these things are important ideologies. So what is happening over time for the past 60 years or 80 years of the independence, that we're trying to marry the two concepts together. Like I mentioned about the concept of Ubuntu. I am because you are. Our sense making is different, but yet the Western world really want us to follow the kind system that are also following. So you find that the advent of political parties in Africa has led to proliferation of election opinion poll. And this started right from 1990s okay, when the liberation of multi-party system. But you can also see that the culture of public opinion measurement is generally very weak on the continent. And that's why, Claire, when you were saying, oh, we'd like to hear from African voice because it's not always, you cannot give what you don't have. So we are still struggling our feet, but we're making progress. And we know that the first major electoral opinion poll in Sub-Saharan was conducted in 1990s. Since then, so many people are trying to conduct polls. And of course, we know, or we're also interested to know that the first comprehensive public opinion was not even conducted by Africans. They are also conducted under the auspices of the Michigan State University Center for Democracy and Development. And that was 1999. Most things that there's no trend, there's no, like say, it's an electoral trend. As you can see later, how people describe electoral polls in Africa. It's also interesting to know that most of the electoral polls are unregulated. The results of the polls either becomes very regular political debates based on political affiliations or where you come from, ethnic nationality affiliations. And very few are conducted by professional pollsters with a proven scientific methodology. In recent years, we also understand how the UN has consistently played an important role in African elections. Sometimes some people can identify Africa as a poor, very poor nation where nothing is happening. But we know that a lot is happening. The only thing is that most of the stories of good things happening are not being told by the mainstream media. The UN provides technical assistance, okay, but also UN has its own personal agenda, its own agenda as an institution in Africa. Today we talk about China. We know also China, it has a very big influence, political influence, because what happens that the gap created by Europe and America by not wanting to invest in Africa gives opportunity to Chinese to come. So, but it's not left for individual country of Africa to define the rules of engagement with Chinese so that it can become a win-win situation. We have a situation also where other foreign nations frequently conduct electoral polls in Africa, especially in election year, for their private consumption, predominantly as a tool of setting their own agenda, not African agenda. We don't have to blame them. The only thing is that it's a wake-up call for every African institution, every African pollster, every African politician to understand that the game is changing and you cannot be left behind. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the elite control the political information and media, as well as their lack of interest to gather data about the ability to deliver what people actually want. Some don't see polls as a kind of a tool for social change, for social development or policy formation. But all these things for the past 10 years, are tilting towards a big change. And we can see proliferation of so many people who want to participate in political electoral polls. As that today, we have media institutions who conduct polls, political parties conduct polls, but for their own internal usage. Politicians themselves also conduct polls for political strategy and campaign. We have professional pollsters, very few of them. We know about Afrobarometer. Afrobarometer cannot do everything because Afrobarometer also need funds to do what is needed in the continent. What happens is that sometimes you have IFES and the Economics Intelligence Unit, IRI, and also tenure. We know about what happened in 2019 election in Nigeria, where tenure intelligence predicted that the ruling party is going to lose election. I mean, it caused a lot of uproar in the system, and so many people actually did not believe them. And then, if you look at this, you see that some people conducted polls, and there was a divergent views. Okay, for example, this makes conducted an online poll in 2009 and gave 55% win to the ruling party APC, and they gave 41% vote to PDP. But eventually, the actual result was 55% for APC and 41% for PDP. But CIMEX said 25% and PDP 48%. So which means actually it was predicted wrongly. The polls did not predict correctly. There is also the Nigerian Votes, which is an online poll that claimed that they conducted 11,326 polls, and of course they gave winning stake to the ruling party. and the opposition party gave 32%. So, and you can see, like I mentioned about the 10-year intelligence before, which is a US-based consulting company, they predicted a win for the PDP, and then that predicted that APC could lose the election. And of course, the economist is saying different thing altogether. So many people don't believe them. And the average thing is that despite claim by some opinion leaders, Africa don't pay attention to polls. But all these things are changing because why? It's relatively new, and some see it as non-scientific. But we know that if a poll is conducted by a credible institution, it stands. There's other factors that we need to discuss about, and that is the behavior of people towards polls. Some people think that polling, electoral polling, is just an enlightened guesswork. Some see it as a situation whereby, during the poll, you have a lot of poll frenzy. So many people want to conduct polls from the international community and the rest. And also, some people call it a corrupt poll. Some say it's a suspicion, maybe a politician just wanted to use the data to manipulate somebody. So divergent views. Some also conduct a credible poll. Now, how is it conducted? How is the election poll conducted? Electoral poll. We have, first, very few independent professionals and local polls that exist in Sub-Saharan Africa, because polls require strong financial budget, and only very few can afford this. Political parties and politicians that conduct electoral polls do that. They do not publish it for public consumption. They only use it as part of the internal political campaign strategy. And most published polls are conducted and sponsored by international organizations. So you can see that he who plays the tune dictates the pipe, or who plays the pipe dictates the tune. Some of the polls, especially the ones that are conducted by non-professional polls, do not follow proven scientific method. A handful rely on social media to do this. And we know they have what it can cause. Another thing is that we have to look at is the local media, the role of the local media. Predicting elections outcome in Africa is very volatile, and not everybody wants to go there. So even the media that do poll from time to time, also they are very cautious, because that can lead them to closing of their businesses by the ruling government, especially if the poll go against their result. So most local companies are often scared to publish their polls publicly because of harassment and threat of business closure by government officials. And of course, we have issue of digital technology, which has now increased awareness of how people communicate. Before now, FTF, which is face-to-face quantitative methodology, featured prominently in most of the electoral polls in Sub-Saharan Africa. Questionnaires administered likely at home. Online methodologies right now represent about 5% of electoral poll methods that are used to conduct in our region. Besides, available online samples are generally not representative. So there are also the issue of online panels, which is a work in progress. Some people claim that they have a very robust online panels in most African countries. But we know that we have our infrastructural challenges. It's okay, some people are trying to build online panel, but you cannot compare it with, like when Jill was making her own presentation about the United States. So we share common things. Most of the things that are happening in Africa is just because it's not because people don't know what to do, but because they are conditioned by lack of infrastructure. There are also the question of some real challenges that we have, which I try to summarize here. The unproven track record of pollsters, poor reportage by the media, because one thing is for the media to have a data, and sometimes they don't know what to do with it. So what we're trying to create now is a kind of a synergy by which the media, of course, you don't blame them because they want to catch the headline that cast sensation. So reporting the electoral data that they consider is very, very dull, except there are aspects of it that actually can make public to buy their paper or read or get to their website. So there's also the issue of inadequate regulation. I know that in 1992, I think Kenya, for example, enacted a publication regulation, Electoral Publication Regulation Act. But apart from that, I don't know much about South Africa, but the rest of other Sub-Saharan Africa, it's not in existence. So there's so much work so much work to be done. And now, what about volatility? Post-election violence is also very key. Why? Is because you see, like we are talking before the webinar come, the issue is this: when a leader or when some set of people don't believe in themselves that elections should be free and fair, no amount of electoral poll can predict rightly. When leaders pick the outcome of the election and that does not represent the will of the people, then we're just wasting our time conducting polls. So honesty is also the type of leadership that we have. And of course, there are so many fake online polls, okay, which actually contributes to the challenges. Then education. Okay, most of the electoral polls that are conducted are just in urban areas. 70% of them are in urban areas. What about the rurals that constitute almost 70% of the population of this sub-region? Okay, I mentioned before of inadequate data journalism. Okay, there's inadequate data for journalists actually to work. Today, everyone talk about data journalism, but of course you have to have something or a work that's already previously been done so that you can do that. There are problems of contradictory results, like I mentioned earlier. Now, during this pandemic, a lot of Africa was hard hit, not because so many people died. So many people died because of the way information was also managed. As a matter of fact, some people were not concerned about anything about election or no election, about politics. They only want to leave their home and fend for their family. So during the pandemic, a number of Sub-Saharan African countries conducted general elections. I mean, you have in Nigeria, in south region, we have a regional election. Presidential election was in Mali, Niger, Uganda. Uganda just finished their own last few weeks. And we know already there are almost a violence that broke out by the opposition. So in fact, the pandemic was a great challenge to conduct polls, especially during the lockdown. The only available option was to go online and use of social media or SMS in order to administer survey questionnaires. So it was really, really tough. If you send questionnaires to respondents, they are not, some of them are non-response rate, almost 70%. Because people are like, there's nothing to support our being at home for 4 months. So many respondents were occupied with thought about COVID-19 than anything else. And of course, the pandemic also put many postcards on spot and for urgent need for digital migration to new technology. It was actually a wake-up call, okay, of the new normal. So the way forward, the way I see it, is that the need to establish a fund and fund a center for electoral poll and media in Sub-Saharan Africa. This will provide continuous training and the capacity development for pollsters and media professionals on how to conduct and report polls. The media industry do not yet know how to report or what to do with electoral poll data. And of course, we are right now, we are thinking about establishment of WAPOR chapter in Sub-Saharan Africa, which will help a great deal to add value in strengthening cohesion and adding credibility to polls once all these are certified, because you know that WAPOR is a credible institution. We also want to encourage the establishment of electoral publication legislation in the countries that do not yet have them. There are so many of them because people want the information they pass to be protected. So we seek strong partnership with media to bridge the gap of inadequate data journalism. And of course, the need to improve voters' education will reduce voter apathy across the countries of Sub-Saharan Africa. I merely wanted to say that electoral poll is a new development in Africa generally, and it is at the moment a work in progress. Ethnicity plays an important role in electoral poll in Sub-Saharan Africa. Even within the same country, pollsters must not overlook the cultural diversity that exists. The kind of electoral democracy practiced in West, which is often expected from Africa, does not reflect African political tradition rooted in diversity and communalism. Of course, due to avoidable electoral irregularities, many elections lead to post-voting violence. So, like I mentioned earlier, is rigged. There's no magic that will make a prediction, electoral prediction correct. It can't happen. Online methodology is now taking center stage in our discussion for electoral polls, and it's of course, because everybody has to go online, digital. But we also know that insufficient research is a major impediment to growth, lack of adequate funding, existing institutions to create data gap. Even to do a small research on opinion polls in Sub-Saharan Africa is like climbing the Everest mountain, because only very few data or previous work exists. And of course, there's also the issue of constant harassment and intimidation of professional pollsters, discourage many from publishing their poll. In fact, as a matter of fact, it's a no-go area for so many people. No matter how good you are in your polling, you dare not publish it in the newspapers or online, because the next day, the government will come after you, and then you'll be in trouble. I remember in 2017, when we did a project in Nigeria, what happened is that the opposition party, the result was going, and then they came and locked all the interviewers. For 7 days, they were in jail for nothing, not tried. And of course, we paid good money to get them out. And of course, one of the posters we have in Nigeria a few years ago, the office was like locked and their computers seized because their name appeared in the newspaper, just name appeared in the newspaper. They were partner to a company that conducted polls, and they were in big trouble for it. So many people are scared about making polls public. But we are undaunted. We continue to do our own little way we can, working with our international partners to make sure that we get it right. It might take a bit of time. We might not finish in our own generation, but at least we have to have something that other people can work. Sorry, I have to rush through this presentation because of time. And if you have any questions, you can always pop me an email. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Can all presenters come back with their camera? And thanks to Robert and Paul for reminding us that in order to have electoral polls, you need to have elections first, and then some democracy also, so that people are not afraid of saying what they think. It reminds me that in 2007, I was in France for the 2017 presidential election, and we had one pollsters from Tunisia polling in France. He could not poll in Tunisia because there were no elections there. So this is an important point. I have a few questions about the future, about, for example, about how artificial intelligence could complement or replace public opinion in the following 5 to 10 years, and a question on the possibility of preference falsification. Everybody can see these questions. I would like to have a question for everybody because Paul just said it at the end, and everybody else mentioned it. What about the technology? What about the fact that we use the web more and more in Africa, in Hong Kong, or in Mexico? It's the same. It's even ahead of what's happening in Canada or United States, because this is the only, like, smartphones are the only way of communication for many people. What I've seen in my research is that web polls tend to be more stable. They tend to have difficulties detecting change if you have panels, for example. So for you all, what about the difficulties of using the new technologies? Where are we going with this? Is it going to be the only polls in the next years? And what should we care for? And you can also, since we're speaking about the future, because we will have time for not much more than one question, is artificial intelligence going to become the future? And I personally see, after every election, somebody who says, oh, we had the result okay after. So next to everybody, the first one to speak, Alejandro, perhaps.
Thank you, Claire. Well, very quickly, taking on your question on technology, I would say that the main challenge right now, because it's so new, it's our lack of knowledge and evaluation of how it is working. We have had few online polls, election related in the past, a few Facebook polls. They didn't do very well, but that doesn't mean they will not do well later. Of course, the larger coverage of cell phones in Mexico helps telephone polls, but still sampling frames are not perfect and are not all available. So there are a lot of serious issues about that. And I think that in this election we will see, and I hope we do see more technological advances in that sense. Of course, the question is how we can get more information with high quality, with fewer resources, and of course, technological change goes towards that way. Very briefly about Hildardo, I think artificial intelligence is complementing and influencing public opinion. I don't think it will replace public opinion because it means replacing humanity, but not in the next 5-10 years, I hope. But I think your question is it replacing public opinion? Polls, and that, my sense for the next 5-10 years, at least in countries like Mexico or Latin America in general, my guess would be no, but certainly it's a challenge. And Rodolfo very quickly raises a question about shy voters or people who give us a preference based on the political context. I think that it has been difficult to measure. I do have the experience in Mexico that we always overestimate a little bit the government party, so there may be something of that for Morena too. But the example you touched, 2012, when most polls had 15 to 20 points ahead to one of the candidates, that didn't happen in our poll, as you remember. I had one at 4-point difference. The election was 6. So I don't think 2012 was a shy voter kind of phenomenon. There must have been something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Now I will ask Robert to say a word. Robert is close to 1 o'clock, yeah, in the morning. So go,
Yeah.
please.
Yes, still awake, don't worry. Well, I think for one thing, when we see all these close downs due to the COVID, actually it is very difficult to run all the face-to-face and so-called traditional polls. Now, of course, you can still use the telephone, but I think when we see all these lockdowns, we are seeing a very new kind of interaction between people, like work from home, interacting, just like now we're using webinars. So the internet is there as a very important channel. It will be growing more and more important. So when we talk about expression of opinion and collection and also studying opinion, I think we have to go with the new technology. But of course, what is new technology? You will recall that when we had the telephone, where that was the very new, so we don't necessarily go to the door-to-door. But then we have the cell phone. And then we had this huge debate for almost a decade on how to use or mix the cell phone with the landlines. Now, I think we are seeing not just the cell phone, but we are so-called smartphone devices, which is not a phone at all, because it's like a mini device, mini computer in front of you, and you use your finger instead of your voice to interact with people. So because this technology grows so fast, I think the measurement of opinion have to change. But as Alejandro has just mentioned, we still lack the kind of enough data, enough conceptual framework to make it really reliable. And the best test would be the prediction of election results. And at least up to this moment, we have not seen any so-called AI data mining people who could reliably predict any election before the elections. So it seems that we're still way too far from saying that traditional polls will be substituted by, say, web polls and AI. But it seems that it is almost a foregone conclusion when we discuss all these accuracy and modes of polling, that we have to opt for mixed mode polling now, because we might think traditional polls are accurate, and then we use that as a benchmark to test the new mode, the online modes, AI, data mining. And of course, we are not getting a very reliable results yet. But I think at the end, we'll have to move forward to first adopt a kind of mixed mode operation. And then with enough data, we try to see which mode, singular mode, is actually better than the other modes. So that is mixed mode. And also technology has to be adopted, but it has to take a pretty long course of action, I think.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Now I will ask Paul for a short answer, and we will finish with Jill, because it's US. So you have to be last at some point. Go, Paul.
My view is that, yes, like Robert said, there's going to be a mixed mode, but it's all about what I'll call system integration. You know, when the radio in the 70s, 80s were there, and then mobile phones, mobile phone replaced radio. This will replace that. But we know today that you can use your mobile phone to listen to the radio. So over time, yes, it will depend from market to market. How it will change in Mexico will be different from how it will change in Africa. How it will change in the United States will be different from how it changes in other places, whether it's a developing nation or not. So because we have different values for different things. So yes, it will take a time. The integration will continue. In the next 20 years, we will still talk about polls. Okay, there's going to be a mixed mode of web, and the artificial intelligence can never replace human mind, no matter how good they are. So there's going to be integrated inside the cell as one, but not a total replacement. That's my view.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Now, Jill, you have the last word.
So I'm not an AI expert. We have someone working with big data, helping us think about response and attrition in our surveys, in our panel, because we're very interested in, thinking about the representativeness of our online panel. We provide tablets to people who don't have internet, and we pay for their internet. So we are able to at least cover some of that group. But I think our biggest concern, particularly because we really focus on social and economic research more than polling even, is that there are people who are lower SES who we are not reaching as well. So we constantly think about that. We're designing studies to think about how we can do that better. And that may, require some different kinds of approaches. But in terms of the sort of the platforms that people can use to take surveys on, people can use their cell phones, tablets, computers to do online surveys with us. And we take advantage of that and also give people devices to measure other things. So we use cell phone apps as well as Fitbits, pollution devices, other activity monitors. To collect data sort of in real time from people. And I think that there's more to be explored with some of that. So if we were thinking about, for example, how to collect data on election day, that might be something that we could integrate as part of, having people fill out information on their cell phones. But I mean, I think there's a couple of things about this that one is how to sort of get the best sort of representation and the biggest coverage of the population, and how do you do that? Obviously, telephone is really tough. Online allows you to target people's, households and collect a sample that way. And so you have the basis for being able to improve that sample through, better recruitment, better practices. And then you also have the ability to leverage the fact that people have a lot of different platforms that they take surveys on. So I don't really have an answer about AI. And I'll let other people think about how that's going to work. But we definitely are integrating a lot of other kinds of data into our work, administrative data, and being able to just sort of understand more about how people voter data. We have voter data files, how people are operating using other data as well. It's not AI, but it is getting into the realm of big data.
Thanks a lot, Jill. So now we get at the end of this webinar. Thanks to everybody for staying with us. A last word to say that the next webinar will be with Don Dillman from Washington State University, adapting push-to-web survey design for use in different countries and situations. So I think it will interest a lot of people. It will be in exactly 4 weeks at exactly the same hour. So thanks, everybody. You will receive a post-conference survey. So please answer the survey. We will also ask you if you have suggestions for the next teams or methods training that you would like to have. So thanks, everybody, and bye-bye.